2 p.m., April 1945, somewhere near the German border, the war was almost over. But inside a cold American prisoner enclosure, another battle was about to begin. It was not fought with rifles, tanks, or artillery. It began with something far simpler, a plate of food. Hundreds of German prisoners of war stood behind barbed wire, exhausted, defeated, and surrounded by the army they had once been told was weak. American guards brought them food, the kind given to prisoners to keep them alive. But then something happened that shocked the camp. The German POWs refused to eat, not because the food was rotten, not because there was no hunger, but because eating American food meant admitting the truth they could no longer escape. Germany had lost, and the men they had been taught to despise were now the ones feeding them. Before we begin, subscribe to the channel for more forgotten World War II justice stories, battlefield decisions, and hidden moments that history books often leave behind. Because this story is not just about food. It is about pride, defeat, discipline, humiliation, and the moment when arrogance met consequence. And by the end, one question will remain. Was Patton teaching defeated soldiers a lesson, or revealing what war had done to everyone involved? By April 1945, Germany was collapsing from every direction. Cities were burning, roads were broken, railways were destroyed, and the once feared German war machine was running out of fuel, food, and time. From the east, the Red Army was closing in. From the west, American, British, Canadian, and Allied forces were pushing deeper into German territory. And among the most aggressive American commanders was General George S. Patton, a man known for speed, discipline, fury, and an almost brutal belief that hesitation could cost lives. Patton did not simply want to defeat the enemy on the battlefield. He wanted them to feel that resistance was useless. But what happened inside one POW enclosure would test something deeper than military power. Because when a defeated enemy still refuses to bow psychologically, even a simple meal can become a weapon. The prisoners inside the camp were not all the same. Some were hardened German veterans who had fought for years. Some were young conscripts barely old enough to understand the war they had been dragged into. Some were still loyal to the Nazi cause, while others simply wanted to survive and return home. But behind the wire they shared one thing: defeat. Their rifles had been taken. Their officers had lost command. Their uniforms were dirty. Their boots were worn, and yet for some of them, pride was the last thing they still believed they owned. So when American food was brought into the enclosure, that pride became their final act of resistance. They looked at the meal and refused it. To the Americans watching, it must have seemed unbelievable. These men were hungry, they had surrendered, they were no longer fighting, and yet they rejected the food being given to them. But to the German prisoners, the food was more than food. It was a symbol. Every bite would prove that the army they once mocked now controlled their survival. Every mouthful would remind them that American trucks, American kitchens, American supply lines, and American soldiers had outlasted the Reich. Their refusal was not really about taste, it was about humiliation. But in war, symbols can be dangerous, especially when they reach the ears of a man like Patton. When word of the refusal reached General George S. Patton, his reaction was exactly what many soldiers would have expected from him. Patton was not a commander known for softness. He believed discipline had to be visible. He believed weakness invited contempt. And above all, he hated the arrogance of a defeated enemy pretending he had not been beaten. To him, the refusal was not just a complaint from hungry prisoners. It was a challenge. These men had lost the battlefield, but they were still trying to control the moment. They had no weapons left, but they were using pride as their final defense. So Patton's answer was cold, simple, and unforgettable. If they refused American food, they would receive no food at all. For the first day, the prisoners could still pretend they were strong. A man can miss a meal and call it honor. He can stand with his comrades and believe he has made a statement. He can look at the guards and imagine he still has power. Around him, others may nod in approval, afraid to be the first to break. In captivity, pressure does not only come from guards, it also comes from the prisoners themselves. The loudest men can shame the hungry ones, the most fanatical can force silence on the doubtful. And so, for a while, pride held the line, but hunger is patient. It does not argue, it waits. By the second day, the mood began to change. The body becomes heavy, the stomach tightens, men stop speaking as much. Anger turns into exhaustion. The same prisoners who refused food as a symbol now began to understand the cost of that symbol. Some may have wondered quietly whether this act of defiance was worth it. Others may have wanted to eat but feared looking weak in front of their fellow soldiers. That is the strange cruelty of pride. It can trap a man even when no guard is holding him down. And inside that camp, the American food they had rejected began to change meaning. It was no longer an insult. It was survival. By the third day, the lesson was complete. The slogans, the pride, the old propaganda, the belief in German superiority, all of it became weaker than hunger. The human body does not care about flags. It does not care about ideology. It does not care what a man was told to believe. It demands food, and when the food was brought again, the German POWs ate, quietly, slowly, without the same arrogance they had shown before. The meal they once rejected had become the proof of their defeat. They had refused it to protect their pride, but in the end their own hunger forced them to accept the truth. They were prisoners now, and the enemy they had been taught to hate was keeping them alive. But this story becomes even more powerful when you understand what food meant in World War II. Food was not just a daily need. It was military power. It was morale. It was organization. It was proof that a nation could still function under pressure. By 1945, Germany was struggling with shortages everywhere. Fuel was disappearing. Transport was breaking down. Cities were damaged. Soldiers were surrendering in massive numbers. Meanwhile, the Americans seemed to arrive with endless trucks, endless supplies, endless canned rations, endless fuel, and endless machinery. That was one of the hidden reasons the Allies won. Not just because they had brave soldiers, but because they could feed them, move them, repair roads, build bridges, and keep entire armies alive across Europe. For construction fans, this is the part of the war people often forget. Victory was built by engineers, bridge builders, drivers, mechanics, cooks, supply crews, and road repair teams. Every prisoner camp needed fencing, drainage, kitchens, latrines, guard towers, water points, and transport routes. Every advancing army needed fuel dumps, bridges, cleared roads, temporary depots, and working supply lines. A tank without fuel is only metal. A soldier without food is only a body becoming weaker. An army without logistics is already dying. So when those German POWs refused American food, they were not just refusing a meal. They were rejecting the entire system that had defeated them. And that is why the humiliation cut so deeply. American food represented American victory. It represented the factories, farms, trucks, ships, engineers, and supply networks that Germany had failed to overcome. Every bite carried a message the prisoners did not want to accept. Your leaders lied to you, your army has fallen, and the enemy you mocked now controls whether you eat. That is why the meal became emotional. Not because of what it tasted like, but because of what it proved. The battle was already over, but inside those men, another battle was still being fought between pride and reality. Still, we must ask the difficult question. Was Patton right? Some will say yes. The prisoners refused food, so he let them face the consequences. To them, it was not cruelty. It was discipline. It was a harsh but simple lesson. If you reject what is given to keep you alive, you cannot complain when it is taken away. But history is rarely that simple. Prisoners of war are no longer active fighters. Once captured, they must be treated humanely, even if they once served a brutal regime. That is what separates justice from revenge. And Patton himself was a complicated man, brilliant, aggressive, inspiring, controversial, and sometimes dangerously harsh. This is why the story should not only be told as a moment of revenge. It should also be remembered as a warning about what war does to human judgment. By 1945, Allied soldiers had seen destroyed towns, murdered civilians, starving victims, and the horrors left behind by Nazi rule. Anger was everywhere, hatred was understandable. But the hardest test of justice comes when the enemy is powerless and your anger feels justified. That is where discipline must be strongest. Because if war turns every punishment into revenge, then victory can also damage the victor.